All right, hello again. So in this video, we're going to go over some Flexbox properties, mostly for the container itself. You'll see something else probably about Flexbox items or Flex items a little bit later or earlier, depending on how you see this in order, of course. So we've got this page here. It's got a bunch of boxes, kind of boring, and we're just going to go through a lot of these different properties related to the Flexbox container. And so what I've got here is the code over here. I'll give this guys to you. I kind of did a lot of the work already, almost all of it. But we're just going to add a little bit of some Flexbox properties inside of these classes. So there's a bunch of classes here. They almost have the same name as the Flexbox property, but it's not exactly the same because the punctuation is different. Yeah, and then if you look down at each one of these boxes is a div with a class of container, and then each of the items has a flex item class on it. That's not really necessary to make this work, but it just makes it a little bit bigger and gives it this pink color, and so you guys can see what's going on a little bit easier. But it's pretty simple as far as the containers. There's a container with a container class on it. The classes are already all applied. So you all know this, but when you want to apply a class, you can just put the name, you put the class equals, and you put the class. And if you want more than one class, you just add another class and another one, as many as you want. I don't think there's a limit, but so that is it, I think. So hopefully you've seen something before on Flexbox, but if you haven't, remember you can always go to see the complete guide to Flexbox on CSS Tricks. I'm going to use it to sort of just show the basics here, this is hopefully review. But if we look at this little schematic, right, this tells you how a Flexbox container works. So when you turn something into a Flex container, it's called a Flex container, the outside element or the parent element becomes a Flex container, and the inside elements, things inside of it, anything inside of it becomes a Flex item. And then you have what's called the main axis, which runs by default, it's going to be left to right horizontally, and then the cross axis is going to run top to bottom vertically. You can change all that if you want with different settings and things. Then you've got a cross size, a main start, a main end, cross start, cross end, all kinds of different terminology. But basic gist of it is you turn something into a Flex container, the items inside of it become Flex items, and you can line them up and size them and space them out and all kinds of things. Yeah. So a couple of things to add before we start. So right now you can see everything is just stacking by default, right? That's what divs do. There's nothing on these divs to make them do anything different. So we're going to turn all these containers into Flex containers. Make this tiny bit bigger, I guess. Turn all these containers into Flex containers by adding display Flex. So I kind of already wrote that in there. So you can just write display Flex. And once I do that, a lot of things changed, right? What happened? Well, they're not block elements anymore. They're Flex items, right? So they're not stacking vertically. They are going to line up, by default, they're going to line up horizontally left to right. And they're going to shrink and get according to their size, right? So these are all pretty small. There's a little bit of padding in here and things that are keeping these open. And then you can see here, these have a little bit more text in them, right? So they get a little bit bigger, and then things take up the full width of the parent container. So Flexbox is the browser and the Flex module sort of figuring out things for you. So sometimes it's a little unpredictable. It has Flex in the name to make it flexible, but it can be a little unpredictable. So that's what we're kind of trying to work with today. The rest of these all look the same because we haven't done anything to these except for down here at the bottom. Some of them I put some different sizes on and things so you can see what's going on a little bit easier, but that's already been done. So right now these flex items are right next to each other. There's no space between them. We can add space by saying gap, not the fun store with lots of clothing for boomers, but oops, I left off the PX, but the gap, right? This is gap. So gap came from, actually from CSS Grid, I believe, and then it was added sort of to Flexbox after. But what it does, it acts like kind of a margin around the flex items. So you can see it added space. It added space right there. So it's kind of a quick way to make space between you don't have to add it, but if you want some space, you can use gap. And you can add it vertically and horizontally if you want. If I put two numbers in, it would be the vertical gap and the horizontal gap, or the main axis gap and the cross axis gap more likely. But for now, we're just going to use it just one number, which is 10 pixels on all sides. So now it has space between them, right? Pretty cool. Very easy. Okay, so next we're going to add some default styles for the flex items. This video isn't really about the flex. There's a whole nother set of properties, which you probably already saw for flex items. This one's more about flex containers, but I'm going to put this in anyway, just so if you see this in a different order, you'll know what this is. So I'm going to say flex 0, 1, and auto. That is the default, so nothing changed, I don't think. So that means the flex grow is set to 0. That's what the 0 means. That means the items will get as small as they can get, basically. Flex shrink 1 means yes, you can shrink. So they did shrink, right? They got small. They're not full. They're not taking up all this space. And then flex basis auto basically means let the content basically determine the width, or not the width, but the size of the element based on its content. So that's why these are bigger. Which ones are bigger? The ones with the text in them. I lost them. Yeah. Oh, there they are. Yeah, those are bigger. Yeah, I knew there was some in there. All right. So, but that's not really about this one. This video is more about the flex other stuff. So we're gonna say this first one. So all you're gonna do here basically is put in the property and the value that I'm putting in, and you'll see things change or not change depending on what's going on. So I'm going to add on this where it says flex direction row. I'm going to add flex direction row, but the syntax is different, obviously, right? So don't get confused. This is not the name of the flex property. This is the name of the flex property. And this is the value, right? So the flex property is flex direction, and which is a really cool band. They used to play with One Direction. They used to tour together. And then there's row is the value. So when we say flex direction row, that is the default. It doesn't do anything. I think we're on this one. So obviously it looks the same. So that's the default, right? Oh, I forgot I have some handy dandy notes inside here for you guys. So it talks about how when you create a flex container with display flex, it acts like a block level element that lays its content according to the Flexbox model. And then an important thing about flex direction, it establishes that main axis. Thus defining the direction flex items are placed in the flex container. So Flexbox, except for optional wrapping, which we'll look at, is a single direction layout concept, meaning it's good for rows and columns. Yeah, rows and columns. If you're thinking about rows and columns, you might be thinking about CSS grid. Now you can make things wrap and do multi-line or multi-directional layouts with Flexbox, but you can also do them with grid, and that's kind of the way you can think about it. Plenty of people do everything with Flexbox, although CSS grid is more and more popular. But just think about it like one direction, like that's a good band too. Horizontal or vertical, right? Okay, so we got flex direction row there. You can also reverse the direction. So I'm going to say flex direction row reverse. So I'm just using these so you can kind of see what these should be set to by just looking at this class name. It's kind of cheating a little bit, but not really. So when I said flex direction row reverse, what happens? If I look down at this this container here, it is backwards, right? So instead of lining up left to right, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, it's now lining up from the reverse side, the right side, the end of the main axis, and going backwards, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 this way. So you can easily reverse the order of things, where they start, where they end, stuff like that. Pretty fun, right? All right, so let's change this to a column. Let's say flex direction column. So that's this guy here. So now we go back to the way it looked before. They are still flex items. They're not block elements. They may look like it, I guess, but you can easily change the direction from rows to columns with one line, right? Flex direction. So there's columns, and then we can also do column reverse. So I'll say flex direction, column reverse. Remember, I can use my arrow keys and just hit it if I want to. And now it's doing the same thing. It is in columns, but since we said column reverse, the first element is last and the last element is first. So that's how you can reorder things, one way to reorder things as well. All right, so now we're to wrap. Not cool wrapper stuff, but wrapping with Flexbox. So by default, Flex items all try to, let me zoom in here a little bit. By default, Flex items will try to fit onto one line. So you can change that by allowing the items to wrap as needed with the Flexwrap property. No wrap is the default. Items are not allowed by default to wrap on multiple lines. I should have said by default, but you can change that. So the first one we're going to say is Flexwrap no wrap, which is the default, so nothing changes on this guy here. And then we'll do the next one, we'll do Flexwrap. I keep typing the E first. Flexwrap wrap. So what happened? So if I resize this, you can see what happens here. When the container is big enough and there's space, there's no difference, right? But when you set it to Flexwrap wrap, it will allow you to, or allow it to start wrapping. So like, oh, I don't really have enough space anymore. Let's just start wrapping. What it does on this one that's set to no wrap, that's the default, right? Is it's just going to say, oh, I ran out of space. I'm just going to start to cram this content together. So this container is changing size and this one is not on this one. Actually it is. Yeah. Well, no, it's not. So that's what I mean by it's a little unpredictable how Flexbox works until you try to play with it a little bit and play Flexbox Froggy. I probably recommended that if it's still around at the time of this video. All right, so next we're moving down to justify content. And this is a really valuable, probably one of the most used properties in Flexbox because it allows you to space things out the way you want, have them start and end where you want, all kinds of cool stuff. So this defines, let me zoom in here again. This defines alignment along the main axis. I can't get it to zoom nowhere I want it to zoom. It helps distribute the extra free space. So this is all about free space, which just sounds like kindergarten, but it's not. When either all the flex items are on a line or inflexible, or they're flexible but I've reached their maximum size. So basically, if there's extra space in here, which there is, right? It also exerts some control over the alignment of items when they overflow the line. We probably won't look at that, but by default, they're going to align to the beginning. So you can see it's already aligned to the beginning of the container, the beginning of the main axis, it should say probably. All right, so let's say justify content and we'll say flex start. I don't think anything will change because it's already the default. So that's this guy, right? But now we can say down on this one where it says justify content flex end, I'm going to say justify content flex end. And what happens? Kind of like our row reverse and column reverse up above, but it doesn't reorder them. It just says where they're aligned, right? So when you say justify content flex end, they go to the end of the main axis. So now they're basically right aligned. So there is no real right and left and stuff like that in the Flexbox. It's more the main axis and the cross axis because you can change it from columns to rows. So left and right wouldn't really make sense all the time, right? So that's why it's that way. All right, so let's do, if we want to center something, right? I'm going to say justify content center. Boom, those are centered, right? So quickly, you can quickly center things and put them where you want them. That is the power of Flexbox, really. Let's do justify content space between. So this one is a little bit different. So what this does is it takes all the extra space. This is extra space here, right? But now it's distributing it between the flex items. So here's a space, here's a space, here's a space, and here's a space. So before this, you had to do all kinds of crazy math, and I know nobody's good at math anymore, so it was caused problems, right? So This, we're letting the browser and the, we're letting the browser figure that out. Like how much space is left over. Okay, divide that equally into 4, because there's 5 items here, and then make it all the same. No math needed, right? But you are letting the browser take over a little bit. So you have to be kind of okay with that a little bit. It's flexible, right? All right, so let's do justify content. I think this one's space around, right? So this one is a little bit different. What this one does, I like to think of as kind of like margins on the side. That's why I wrote sort of like a margin. It takes all the extra space and divides it up on the outsides as well. So here's one, I'll call it a unit. Here's another unit, here's another unit. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1. 1 on the sides, 2 on the in-betweens. So that's kind of how that works. Kind of like margin on the sides. Let's do space evenly, which is a little bit newer, I believe, but it should be pretty well supported. Remember, you can always look at can I use if it's still up when this video is up, and check things. Just look up can I use and it'll tell you different properties and when they became available in all the browsers, that kind of thing. I should probably show you guys that, but I won't show you it yet. So space evenly, what does that do? That is kind of cool. It takes all the extra space and just makes it all even. So this is the same size as that, and that. So you can see there's 3 variations with 1 line of CSS, and we can get pretty different spreads as far as like how those elements are spaced out. And if you're thinking like, maybe I already said this, but like a navigation bar, right? How do you want those elements in the navigation bar to be spread out? You can just change 1 line and have it done for you. All right. So now we're looking at align items. So these ones that start with align are usually, I think, align items, in this case anyway. They're talking about the cross axis instead of the main axis. So we've been working on the main axis, which is the horizontal axis so far. Now we're going to work with the cross axis. So I'm going to say align items stretch, which is the default. There it is. I don't know why it's on there twice. And nothing happens. So basically these items are allowed to stretch and fill up the cross axis, right? So we can't really see about the alignment start. So I added some extra styles to some more of these so you can see how we can change things. Let me go align items. I forgot which one we're on. Flex start. All right. So this is one that I changed a few things in the styles. You can take a look if you want. I don't want to make this video 2 hours long, but so now these boxes have gotten smaller, but now we can see how they're aligning. So flex start means the cross axis again, right? Where does the cross axis go? It goes this way, right? So this is the flex start. This is flex end in that dimension anyway. So we say align items flex start, they're going to line up here. Let's try flex end. Align items flex end. So now they're at the bottom or the end of the cross axis, right? So here's flex start because it goes from this direction. Here now it's at flex end. Awesome, right? Let's do another one. Let's do align items center. And now they are in the middle, which basically vertically centers them. You may or may not know this, but that was pretty tough to do back in the day. There was all kinds of weird transform tricks and all kinds of display table, all kinds of nutty stuff. Now you can do it pretty easy, right? So I can make a navigation bar if I wanted to. Say this is a navigation bar. The items line up next to each other. I say, oh, I want those items to be vertically centered. I add align items centered, and they're centered. Look at that. How fun is that? All right, so now we've got align content flex start. This is maybe a little bit tougher to see, but we'll try it anyway. I'm going to say align content flex start. And I believe that's already what we have here. So this is how are they distributed throughout this box? So it's going to start up at the top and go this way. Let me do the flex end one, and then we'll see. I guess I don't have a center. Yeah, we'll pretend I did. I'm going to say align items, flex end, just so we can see the difference here. Now we can see it. Okay, so we've got align items, align content, flex start. So it starts up here, starts from the top of this box. If I say align items, flex end, it starts at the bottom of the box. So it basically aligns them to the bottom right corner in this case, and here it's the top left corner. I had one for center, but I don't have a box for it. Yeah, so we'll ignore it. You guys can play with that if you want. Oh, I did add some extra classes. So I added a few other classes: align content center, align content space between, and align content space around. Let's move this guy over here. This is a comment tag, right? So these are unused. There's no boxes for them either, but if you guys want to play with those, feel free. You'd have to make your own containers and things. But yeah, I think that's plenty of stuff about Flexbox containers and some of those properties. Hopefully that made a little bit of sense, but it does take practice and playing with it because there are some funky things. I will try to give you guys some other references as well, like explanations of some of these things, maybe more in depth, because it is a little, I'm not going to lie, it's a little bit funky to get your head around sometimes. But once you do, you start to get a feel for what's going to happen. But sometimes it just takes some playing with it to see how it works. But I think that's it for this one. So I will talk to you again later.